Earlier this week, Amnesty International approved a controversial policy to endorse the de-criminalization of the sex trade, rejecting complaints from some women's rights groups who say it's tantamount to advocating the legalization of pimping and brothel owning. Tomorrow in Dublin, the human rights watchdog will finally endorse the decriminalisation of the sex trade. From there, the organisation will go on to lobby governments around the world to accept its point of view. Now, in South Africa in Women's Month, the rights of sex workers has not only been marginalised, but has not been highlighted. Today at Newsroom, we ask what significance National Women's Month has for the female commercial sex worker in South Africa, and what this new policy could mean for them. From the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, or SWET as we know them, we're joined by Gauteng's Provincial Manager, Dianne Massawe. Dianne, I thank you for joining us today.
Good morning to you, Anine, and to your viewers.
Definitely some interesting news happening.
Positive news, yes, coming from Amnesty International.
Definitely,
yes.
Definitely. So, firstly, of course, I want to ask you what your views on this are, SWET.
I mean, initially when we heard that they were looking to either support or not support decriminalization of sex work, as an organization, we were hoping and partners that they would support decriminalization of sex work, because we see this as the only, policy or framework that actually protects sex workers internationally. I think in terms of their policy and some of their recommendations, they are not saying they want to support pimping or brothel keeping, but what they're saying is what makes sense for sex workers is for their trade to be decriminalized. And one of the main reasons why they have critiqued against legalization is because under a legalized model, you still have state control and you can still have a two-tier system that's happening, and people who do not abide to the regulations are still criminalized, which still then doesn't address people's human rights.
We know there are still so many stigmas attached, so many people against this type of work. So what I want to ask you, is South Africa going to be one of those governments that are going to sit up and listen and really take this issue seriously, seeing that what is being suggested now?
I mean, we hope so. And I think this year we've seen a lot of positive moves from our government. The fact that the Law Reform Commission has been tasked to submit their paper, and we're told they are in the process of submitting it to the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. At the World AIDS Day conference, the Deputy Minister and the Minister spoke positively about sex work and the need to work with sex workers and to reduce stigma and to ensure that people are accessing, health services. So I think the government is listening. And I think there's also been a lot of positive move in the country, not only by sex workers, but women's organizations and other organizations to say it's about time, the government does, do what's in the best interest for women. And seeing that this is Women's Month, this is a women's issue. And I think women's organizations who don't support sex workers because of the trade must look to say what is in the best interest for women in terms of their rights in this country.
Now, Dianne, being from SWET, you'll know that it's not always the case that women who work within the sex trade are there by choice.
Yes.
So tell us more about that. I mean, how many members do you have? And tell us some of the cases that you see within the trade.
I mean, in terms of members, I'm not able to, to pinpoint a figure, because we work with all sex workers. So even sex workers who don't support the model that we work under, we support. Even sex workers who we don't have access to, when they do call us, we will support. But I think in terms of some of the main issues, and yes, sex work is not the first choice for a lot of women, but it is a choice that people make out of limited options. The reality is a lot of sex workers in this country are supporting between 3 to 4 people. A lot of sex workers are heading single-headed households, they're supporting their families. And so for them, although this might not be the first option, it's an option that makes economic sense. Back in 2008, ISS and SWET did a study that looked to say, and in that study we spoke to 208 sex workers in Cape Town, granted. And one of the questions that was asked is, what's your level of education? And how much do you earn making doing sex work? And then they spoke to economists to say, at somebody with this level of education, how much could they earn if they were not in sex work? And the economists said people earn up to 4 times more doing sex work. The reality is a lot of sex workers are doing this to survive and to support their families.
There's still so much resistance, and I know we've had you on the show before. We even had one of your members talking about the way they are being treated by police.
Yes.
So with a policy like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that their rights are going to be respected. And I'm almost wondering that there could even be more discrimination, seeing that if we do go ahead and legalize something like this, wouldn't it in some cases lead to someone caring less about your rights?
I mean, I think the Amnesty position is decriminalization and not legalization. And I think under a decriminalized model, there will be a lot more respect for the sector because the sector will be treated like any other sector. I think one of the challenges that sex workers have when sex work is criminalized is the fear of coming forward to report rogue police officers or bad clients, because you then fear, one, for the stigmatization, but also you then fear outing yourself as a criminal and risk prosecutions. So I'll give an example of a country like New Zealand where it's decriminalized, and we've gone to do site visits, we've gone for learning tours in New Zealand, and the police actually treat sex work like work. Police will go into brothels, they'll ask street-based sex workers what concerns and issues they've got, and they're able to then respond faster when there are bad clients or when there are poor working conditions in brothels.
Well, Dianne, just quickly to wrap up, what campaigns are you busy with from Sweat's side, just to shed some light on what it is that your members stand for and what they do?
I mean, in terms of Women's Month, at our head office last week, there was a big event around, respecting sex workers' rights. But other than that, what we've done is we've asked other organizations to include us in their activities so we can start, speaking to a wider range of people. I think when we as an organization have our own events, we are almost speaking to the converted. Whereas if we have, trade unions or other bigger organizations inviting us, we're able to then speak to a variety of people that we wouldn't have access to. But I think in terms of Women's Month, what we as an organization are asking for is that the rights of sex workers are respected. I'm not saying that, this is a profession that people, want to get into. And even anybody, you don't have to understand why someone is doing sex work. But what you need to do is to say what is in the best interest of a human being, and that is to protect their human rights, regardless of whether you support what they do or you don't.
Yes, definitely. Well, Dianne, I thank you, and I thank you for the work that you're doing. That's Dianne Massawe from Sweat. She's Gauteng's Provincial Manager. Now,